We are almost live. The YouTube link is slowly uploading to everything. Let me do... Hello, everybody. We're not starting yet. We're just waiting for everyone to join. Let me do a final post in the Discord. Let's go. All right. And I need to link it. Ding, 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 ding. Okay, it is live. And all I need to do is to send the link. All right. All right, everybody in the chat, can you hear us fine? Say something. Let's go. Give me some Viking skulls and Viking roars in the main chat. Awesome. All right, we're gonna wait for 2 or 3 more minutes. Borja is just silently lurking in the shadows right now. But he's in the call with me right now. He's just not speaking.
I'm here.
Say hello to everybody, Borja.
Letting you do your thing. Hello, everybody.
How's it going? Yeah, we're professionals here. See how professional we are? Yeah, we're gonna give it like another 3 minutes for people to join and stuff like that, so no one is left behind. How's the weather over there, Borja? Is it hot, Borja?
Oh, you asking me?
Yeah, you're the guest today. I'm not gonna talk to myself, man.
Oh, the weather's great.
The weather's great.
I mean, when you come visit, you'll know.
I know.
It's pretty much always sunny here.
I know. That's what terrifies me about California, you know.
Yeah, you kind of, if you find an apartment in California, you have to make sure you have a really dark room in your apartment. Yeah, AC, yeah. But a nice dark work room.
Yeah.
Some people like, to be in a very sunny room when they work. I prefer a little bit of darkness. Otherwise,
no, I
can't see what you're doing.
Yeah, full-on vampire style, man. The other day I went to fix pipes and dig potatoes. I was in the sun for 5 minutes. I got burned.
Oh my gosh. You're gonna have a hard time here, dude.
I know. All right, guys, we're gonna wait for like maybe 1 more minute for other people to join. And meanwhile, guys, if possible, go share this link with everybody. Make a repost on Instagram, because this is a very rare moment when an actual director comes, because they don't have much time. I've seen Borja's Google Calendar multiple times, and it terrifies me. And just the fact that he can spare some time to be here is amazing. So if possible, I dropped a link on Instagram and stuff like that. So, call your grandma, call your friend from high school, even if he doesn't draw or paint, because today's going to be awesome. And you know what? I think we're going to start. So let's do this, guys. Welcome, everybody, to lecture 2. Today is an epic day. You have no idea how epic it is, because you don't know Borja and I do. So trust me, today is a very epic day. Maybe not exciting for you, but exciting for me, because I don't get much time to spend with Borja anymore, because he works all the time, I work all the time. And today we'll be covering a lot of things, right? So today's lecture is point of view of a director, how he works, how Borja's magnificent brain is structured, and how he approaches, pipeline animation, and how he tells stories, because that's his full-time job. He is a professional storyteller. So without any further ado, a veteran of the industry, super cool, epic one-man army of a titan who does basically everything. I don't know what singular thing that this man can't do. Borja Pena, one and only. Borja, I'm gonna shut up now. It's grown up, it's parents talking time now. And yeah, take it away. What? The stage is yours.
Yeah, I'll turn on my screen so you guys can see me. Cool introduction, by the way, Misha, as always.
Yeah. Good luck living up to it, man. Good luck.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I want to say thank you. I mean, obviously, I think what you're doing is super cool. I watched the first class on Monday. I was like captivated. Obviously, I've heard Misha talk for many hours in my life, and it never fails to be interesting. So yeah, thank you for having me. I'm always here in any way that I can share some information. I think with from what I gather, it's always very interesting to see the process of projects, and really it seems like, as always, it's very nice to see like where those pieces of the puzzle fit, before we can actually create something that's final that we can actually share. And knowing that visual development is such a huge part of not just the idealization of an actual story, but all the way up to every little detail that has to get made and eventually ends up in the film. I think you'll see that. I'm going to show you guys a short film that I worked on called Lost and Crown that Misha had a part in as well. And just really how we got from sort of like the nugget of the idea, like just, coming into the room with absolutely nothing, and eventually developing that idea into something visual and exciting. And I'll focus mostly on the visual development, but I think you'll see potentially how you could take any of your ideas, if you wanted, and take it to a whole epic level, whether it's a short film or a full film or even just one piece of art, whatever that may be. But yeah, I'll start. I've already had this preamble with Misha, so I think Misha, feel free to jump in and interrogate me or tell me if
the talk is Misha approved. Yeah.
So I'll share a little screen. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So the title, like, why do you think? So what's the story? What's the story, dude? Like, what's the story about? What's the story, dude?
Let me share this. I made a nice little. I'll keep my video on just in case it helps. I have two screens, so I'll be looking in many different directions. But I thought that even though we're going to be talking about the concepting phase of this particular project, Lost and Crown, there's this one question that just always pops up for me, and it's popped up since I was just starting out in the industry, and then even up to today, like 20 years in there. And it's this question of what's the story? I mean, I think even from an early age, when I would just I started as an illustrator, and when I was just doing concepts and cool designs and stuff like that, I always had this question come up, and it'll be like my friends asking me like, okay, cool, you have this cool frog dude and then some robot next to it, but what's the story? And at first, my approach to that was really just to get a cool piece of art first and then make up a story around it. And I found myself tripping a lot when somebody asked me that question, because I would come up with things, and I realized that really, as far as I took it, was just this scene or this little concept of this cool idea of a moment. But I didn't have like a real heartfelt story or something that I was personally attached to that I could really explain to somebody why I chose a robot or why I chose a frog character, or anything like that. It didn't have that much meaning behind it. It was just really, really cool. And as I continued, in my process through the years, this story kept coming up, especially as you keep growing in your career, and more important people are asking you that question, whether you have a little idea for a short or something bigger. This always comes up. And me personally, I've always prioritized the visual first and then the story second. And then I realized that I kind of had to shift my process of thinking, because I was just kind of putting cool stuff on the page, and I needed something with a bit more meat in its bones, so that I can really focus on the story I'm trying to tell and not just the cool piece of art that I'm trying to show. And it just became the reasoning for everything for me, to just start focusing so much more time on the story and what it really meant to me, what the story arcs of the characters were, and even what the tone of it was. And it just gave me all this other level of reasoning as to why I was approaching visual development a certain way. And then it kind of made me realize that at the end of the day, with these artworks and these pieces of art, we're all trying to tell a story, whether it's a very emotional Pixar type of story for all audiences, or whether it's something a lot more adult or sci-fi like Interstellar or something like that. At the end of the day, there has to be some reason that you're wanting to tell that story so desperately to support the cool visuals that you're going to eventually create. And yeah, I mean, Misha, we talk about this all the time, but to me, that's that question that it comes up so many times, and it's such a thorn if you don't really have the answer, and it really gets you thinking a lot and almost doubting your work at times. But it's a very simple thing to get to, and I'm going to kind of dive a little bit as to how we approach that for Lost and Crowned. Now, in this process, I did bring up some images just to kind of throw in there in the sort of heart of this being a Viking themed, I guess, visual development course, because there's Misha at the helm. I wanted to show some pieces of art, you know, from Misha's personal project that I'm sure everybody here knows about, the Viking Saga. I personally love this project, and I've had endless conversations with Misha about the story, so I know that there's a big story behind it. But at the same time, it's very easy to take a cool concept like this and just stop there. And then when somebody asks you, well, what's the story behind this cool thing that you design? Why is there a bug fighting a Viking? Why is he running away? What is going on? And why does he have this larva in there? Did he steal it? Is he feeding his family? Is it a piece of economy that he's trying to show off to his village? Or these larvae just some kind of crazy aliens that are taking over the world, and he's trying to stop their population from growing? There's so many stories you can come up around that. But I think it gets a little troublesome when there's not like a full core to the reason that you did that, because then you kind of get stuck explaining it. And I'm not using these images because Misha doesn't have a story. He does. It's fantastic.
Just Borja likes bashing me. You know? Wait,
but
yeah.
But you know what I mean? I think it's nowadays, especially when you're going through like ArtStation and hitting that refresh button and all this stuff, there's so much cool art. There's so much cool stuff in there. But really finding something that kind of grabs you, that feels like it has a lot of story. And I think with Misha, there's a lot of that already in there. These concept frames, there's so much to the choice of lighting, to the choice of expressions, and to the choice of composition and mood that tell you that there's a story there that you need to find out. And obviously when you talk to the artist, there's so much behind it that he thought about before adding all these characters and all of these different elements. And I think that's kind of what I'm going to try to get to with explaining how we got to Lost and Crowned, that all of these elements that you're adding on can only come from a reason, and that has to be the story that you're trying to tell. And the more that there's a story to tell, the more love and passion that's going to go into that piece of work, and the more sort of emotional attachment that not just you but everybody's going to find from it, from all the details. And yeah, I mean, that's always been like this question that has just been coming up so many times. And once I started focusing on that a little bit more, I think all the work just took a whole new life of its own. And yeah, your work always does that. So,
you know,
I mean, obviously, yeah.
Yeah, it's like every time we get on a call and I usually get excited about something, to show a bunch of paintings to Borja. This is how our calls usually go. I'm like, yeah, Borja, look at this. And then I start like going to like world building in detail, and then Borja's like, yeah, Misha, this is super great. That's awesome. Very nice. Pat on the head, you know? But he's like, all right, let's talk about the story. What's the simple statement? I'm like, and you know, sometimes it was really heartbreaking because I'm like, I have no idea, man. I fell in love with a moment, you know, and as you said yourself, I was trying to build sometimes, you know, a whole story around one cool image, and it can work sometimes, but that's not the way, right? And I think in your presentation, you have a really good point of like how to start your project with that, like, you know, emotional core, but then you'll have the time to explore and stuff like that. Yeah,
and there's so much you can do with an image, and you can go crazy, you know, changing all the stuff. But at the end of the day, like that story that you're trying to tell, whether, again, it's one image can tell 1,000 stories, but then also this image can be scaled up and you can build on it and eventually have a full film and a full package to present, or even to create. And I think that's something that sometimes is lacking a little bit, because we're so driven to create cool stuff first and
Yeah.
then figure out the story after.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's kind of what we're going to get into now. Hopefully you've seen Lost in Crown. If you haven't, you should go check it out. It's a fun short film, and it took, we spent 2 years making it. I'm going to try to be as open as I can. There's never been a proper like making of this short, and it took a lot of hours and time and days to create. But the process is the same as even just creating a single illustration. Only this time it was, eventually turned into a short film. Now, one thing that was cool about this project is that if you're not familiar with the property, there's 2 games, Clash of Clans and Clash Royale, that already exist, and they kind of have this whole ecosystem of its own. We've been doing films for these 2 games for a long time, and not like full films, but trailers that are usually very war focused and try to enhance what's going on the battlefield in this sort of cinematic form. And these are projects I've worked on with Misha and Toby and Felipe, who are going to be in this talk for many years now. But when it came to doing a completely original short film in this world, starting from scratch, what are we going to do? And particularly at the time, I was tasked with writing ideas for this and eventually directing it. And it's like, where am I going to get something that I can tell this whole story from? And the same way that I was figuring out illustrations back when I was a little younger is so what's the story, right? What's the story going to be? And for me, what works very, very much is to try to find something that you can grab to in many levels. I'm very visual person. I lean heavily on visuals and details. But recently I've started to discover my inner heart a little bit more and try to incorporate that into the process. So as I was coming up with all these different ideas of like, oh, okay, well, we can do these things with barbarians. And then maybe there's this whole battle that happens over here. Maybe there's this whole like journey about going from one end of the world to the other, something like that. And none of that stuff was really resonating because it just felt like cool things to do. But then I kind of started piecing together things I personally love. And I started to go back into a bit of a journey. And I've always wanted to do something with my childhood. I have a little sister. This is me and my little sister. And I've always thought, oh, that would be a cool thing to kind of jump into a little bit. Then I'm also like this massive Spielberg fan, which Misha knows, and everybody that ever works with me, obviously I have an ET hat on. And it's kind of like my childhood films. That's the films that got me excited about filmmaking. And I always love this one scene from Indiana Jones when he steals the idol and the whole room just goes into like booby trap mode. And then naturally, another sort of film that kind of popped into my mind at the time was Goonies. And particularly in Goonies, I love the scene where they break this statue. And I'm not going to say what part of the statue they break. And they're trying to conceal the broken statue from the mom. And they're trying to like piece it together and like figure it out and like scramble and like, oh my God, where does the piece go and all this? And that kind of became like the 3 sort of like kind of like key elements of this. In fact, all of Lost in Crown is really just these 3 ideas, right? It's growing up with my little sister, this moment in Indiana Jones, and then that scene from the Goonies. And that kind of felt like, okay, I got something where I can draw from a lot. Like inspiration wise, Indiana Jones is like, it's one of my top favorite films. So I know that I'm going to have all these cool things I'm going to want to reference and all that stuff. The scene from Goonies is super fun, and it's got this great play on characters and the drama and the sort of the intensity, the tension that's happening there before mom shows up. And then when I'm stuck with like, well, where am I going to take these characters? I have this whole life that I had with my sister growing up, all of these different like references and moments that we shared that I'm going to draw from. So I already know that this story is going to be personal, it's going to be super exciting, and it's going to be a whole lot of fun. And that's basically what Lost in Crown turned into. It was this core subject, right? And I was going to say like, okay, well, we have to make these 2 characters. I mean, I'm not going to use me and my sister, obviously, but we have to use 2 characters that maybe kind of define the world. And it turned into these 2 skeletons, and it kind of felt perfect. These 2 skeletons have nothing to do with each other, but kind of felt like, okay, well, we're going to put them together in this film, and that's it. That's the story. Now, from there, obviously, getting that core concept just becomes the entire. It's just like a waterfall. we have to create a film, we have to create this story with pacing, all these visuals, all this stuff, but at least we have this sort of beacon of light that we're always going to be drawing to, and it's all going to support that concept and that idea, that sort of nugget and that heart that kind of it all began with. And I think this is something that, like, even when I brought Misha early into the project and Toby, this is all we talked about. Right? This is everything. Like, we just kept talking about that. And even when I started to write the idea for the film, and like, okay, what's going to happen with these characters and where are we going to take it, and then all this stuff that's going to happen, it all fell from these three experiences, right? These three references. And I think that's kind of like, something that is important, and it can be very simple when you're developing a story. It doesn't have to be like this crazy, mega elaborate idea. That will happen. All those branches will start to grow on their own as you're developing it, and you'll see that right now. But at least get something that you can feel like a strong connection with, and everything else is just going to develop into something super, super cool. Just because
People already asking, are you Larry or the other skeleton?
You know what? Because I can't really connect too deeply with my sister. I was a big brother, so I know the responsibility of being a big brother, and I know the angst of having a little sibling that's really annoying, that's really like getting in your way all the time. But at the same time, I was also a crazy child. I just didn't realize it on that point of view, and I should have realized that my sister was little and was going through the same experiences I was. And really the whole story is just about that sibling rivalry, and the idea that when you're an older sibling, you have a big responsibility, and kind of coming to terms with that. So I guess I'm more the Peter character, the other dude.
Yeah. I got really connected to this animation short too, because I have a little brother, and it was perfect, man. It was our first project together. I'm very nostalgic about this. Like, yesterday I was rewatching and I was like, man, there's so much, just hard work, and especially you in it, because when I rewatch like your work, because I know you very well now. I know your, taste, I know your background and your mentality on stuff. And it's kind of amazing that now I can actually see, like, 3 or 4 years later, or like 2.5 years later, I don't remember. It's almost been like forever, that like who you are as a person and what you care about, I can see in your projects, right? How passionate you are about this topic or this topic, and stuff like that. So I was even a little bit emotional yesterday when I was rewatching it, because I was just remembering just our endless calls. And it was my first freelance with you. I was trying to impress you. That's when I started going to
no need for that.
Oh man, I was going to cold showers nonstop and not sleeping. I remember I slept in a few of our calls. I was so nervous I'll get fired. But anyway, sorry, it was a little. I just wanted to say that.
No, I mean, that's a good point. Look, the whole point of this conversation is that if for any of your work, and again, I mean this very much, whether you're doing a full story or a beautiful keyframe, or even the design of a book that goes in a room, if there's something you can like relate to from your experiences, so many people are going to relate to it, because we're all the same. We're not all the same, but we're all here together, and we've all experienced something that we can vibe. And I think that's what's so interesting when you're telling somebody a story, even if it's just a story at the bar or at home, you're going to find a relationship, and that's the conversation that's going to start. And I think the story is your point of view of an experience. And you're just telling it in a certain way. Is it going to be an action? Is it going to be a sci-fi? Is it going to be a fantasy? You're choosing like the way that you're going to deliver that. But the heart we can all relate to. And in this particular case, siblings, whether somebody or you experienced it yourself, you're gonna definitely connect with it. And from there is where the fun begins, right? Like the early development, which I'll walk you through, because I kind of take an approach that some people don't. And again, this is very biased, because this is just the way I do it, and it does derive from a lot of processes. I just kind of selfishly said, like, this is what works for me, and that's the way I'm going to work with my artists. But early development to me is like this sort of a mishmash of everything. right? It's I'm developing the script. I have a great idea for a structure. I'm working with my writer, but even while the script is being developed and it's not quite finished, like I told you guys before, I'm so visual. I got to see stuff right away. I have all these ideas for scenes, for rooms, for locations, for sequences, and it just feels so much more fun to kind of just throw it all in, bring in the early set of artists, and I have a crew that I love to work with, and just start throwing ideas out. I like to tell my storyboard artists in this particular project, we had 3 storyboard artists and an editor all in one room while we were writing the script, while we were doing art, and just trying to figure it out all at once. Because when you see something on the page, and when you're just writing your idea on paper, it feels good because like, okay, this scene connects with that scene and that scene connects with that scene. But then when you start concepting it, you're like, oh crap, it doesn't make any sense. And then when you start seeing it as a storyboard, you're like, wow, these characters are really boring. And suddenly it doesn't work because you're justifying it on paper, but as a flow, it doesn't quite work. So I like this early development to have everything, and not just because it's a way for me to see a lot of stuff, but it's a way to bring other minds like storyboard and design, and let those artists take this idea that I'm presenting to them, this story that I hope they understand, and start putting stuff into it. And then from that, it becomes this great collaboration that's more visual, so that it feels a lot more like a film very, very early on before we get into actual visual development. So early development is super fun for me. And I always say this is a time to explore. Nothing is final. Absolutely nothing is final. And nothing usually is final until the day you press deliver. And even then you close your eyes and you're like, crap, I didn't finish, but eventually it settles itself and you're like, that's always the way it was going to be. Never anything is final. But at the very beginning, it's kind of a mistake. And I've done this a bunch, to lock yourself to ideas, because those ideas are going to break and those ideas are going to get completely redone. Also finding the story in early drafts. Obviously this is happening now. References, sketches, and early. I think Misha said this in the first class. Reference everything. Like when you have an idea and you have a little bit of a story already cooking and you have something personal, pull it all out, man. Throw it all on a board. Just get crazy, because you just don't know what inspirations are going to make it grow and grow and grow. And you got to see stuff. You can't just be stuck in a bubble forever. I think it's so nice to keep your mind, remove the walls, the skull, and just have your brain fresh out. You're just absorbing everything. Obviously storyboarding is happening in early keyframes, which for me, early keyframes, which I'm going to show you right now, that's world building. That's setting the tone. That's finding the emotional. That's the cinematography. Everything happens day one. Let's just figure it out before we dive into all the depth. And that's kind of how it all started. Look, after we got a script going, and I'm going to blast through a bunch of art, because that's essentially the core of the topic that I want to get to. And I'll show you guys. Let me get out of here real quick. When the script is first done, I like to get in really dirty. And I'll show you my process. I like to dive in and start concepting all kinds of storyboards. I used to be a good illustrator, I think. Now I go really fast. But I like to just storyboard scenes. And these are scenes that are in the film, where Larry and Peter are in the rocket scene, and all kinds of stuff. Anything that comes to my mind, sequences that feel really cool, compositions that might work or not work, I sketch it all out. Like this is day one, right along the script. I'm just like putting it down. It's like, does this scene work? Can I see it happening? Can it not? And by the way, a lot of these sketches, which maybe just look like some kind of Egyptian writing or something, some kind of like old caveman art. This for me works, and I've worked with Misha and Toby and Felipe for so long that this is the stuff I send them. like when Misha, like when you're coming into the project and you're like, what are you thinking for composition? And I'm like, well, some of this stuff is more refined, but a lot of it will be like circles.
But you know what?
You're like, yeah.
I learned how to interpret the Borja doodles there, because the thing is, people don't understand that there's still really good compositions when you. And that's the cool thing if you have your favorite director to work with, you start talking the same language, you start understanding everyone from, like, if you're going to doodle like a little spinkadoodle on a napkin, I'd be like, I got you, Borja. I know, because, I watched all the Spielberg movies that you like. You know, when I watch it, usually when I'm on a project, I just have like, all right, I have to rewatch this movie, this movie, this movie. You know, kind of like a tradition. And
Oh yeah, you have to get on the same wavelength
yeah,
all the time.
I love
And
your sketchy doodles. They're so helpful because the thing is, probably you guys don't know, but it's not the director's job to sketch anything for artists. You know, a director's like, it's usually my responsibility to make your life easier, Borja. You know, but the thing is, from my perspective, Borja is. It's really important to him to communicate his vision exactly. So he goes to the length of actually sketching it out, and that's very rare, you know. And that's when you know that you have a really good, you're blessed with a good director. I gotta shut up and give you the mic back. Sorry,
I mean, it's I would say that's a good thing about, you know, being able to do any kind of art is just allow the doodles to flow first, you know, and really, I think even when I'm trying to come up with a concept frame, like an idea for I do like thousands of these just to figure out like the pacing and like what is the actual story before I freeze frame on a concept that I'm going to ask someone like Misha or Toby to try to attempt to make it, you know, super cool and cinematic. And I think it's very important to keep it loose. And that's what I'm saying. All this stuff, if you even recognize scenes from the movie in that, most of that went in the garbage and it didn't make it in because it just didn't work. Now, with this process, I like to bring in a storyboard artist as well. And this guy in particular, Mike Deweese, he's somebody I've worked with for a long time. And this is before we even have like fully fleshed out ideas for the scenes. But what I like about working with Mike right away is that we can get you know, these are just like kind of like rough animated storyboards. We can get ideas really quickly of what are these characters going to do? How is he going to lose the crown? In the film, if you didn't, this is something that nobody knows, but how the characters lost the crown and what kind of turned on the railroad that we go on this ride on for the rest of the film was the most difficult thing in the world. And you're going to see that a lot of these storyboards and images, there was never that door in the back. You know, there eventually I ended up scripting in this idea that there's this door and behind that door, there's this whole world of treasure and all that stuff. And then there's this one thing that you're not supposed to touch just because it needed something more exciting to propel the film forward. And because this film doesn't have any dialogue, it's all purely, you know, emotional based and action based. You need things to push the characters in a very simple way that it's not something like, hey, don't touch that or it's going to explode. That would be really easy to do, to have somebody just say that in the film, and that will make it all so much easier. But it didn't happen that way. But here we're just exploring ideas like, how are we going to do jokes? How are we going to do clever jokes? And how are we going to use the crown as something that we can move the film forward with? Because the crown kind of became the football for like, you know, like a football game or something like that. But there's so much you can do with it. So that's early development. I mean, we're cooking up, and I'm going to show you so much stuff. I'm going to try to blast through it for the sake of time. Now, at the same time, I'm doing some sketches. I'm sending this stuff to Toby, and then Toby's starting to put together film, like almost film concepts. And I know these are usually called keyframes or key art. And really the whole purpose of this phase, especially this early on, is to get a sense of the cinematic scale for a film. What is like the tone? How does it feel? What is it stylistically? What is the cinematography? What is the lighting? Even really early world building ideas, like how are we staging it? What is the sort of design of the set dressing? And what are our characters going to look like? And I think you can already tell our characters were kind of more adult before we started making them younger and shorter and shorter until it eventually became these two young kids. But there was a lot of stuff here that, you know, while we were working on the script and we're working on these sort of early storyboards, I was working with Toby on these cinematic sort of compositions. And they were trying to tell us, like, what are these characters going to do? Is this character going to scratch his back with his arm and that's how we lose the crown? Or does he accidentally put it on because he misplaced his helmet and that's how we lose the crown? Or does he accidentally knock it off the pedestal and that's how we lose the crown? And, you know, it was sort of almost like storyboarding it, but seeing it this way for me gets me really excited about what we can do with the film And I'm already thinking all kinds of other stuff like, oh man, set dressing wise, we should put another room back there. We should really play with the lighting. Like this doesn't feel quite right. It almost feels like afternoon, but I think this needs to be more nighttime, like the graveyard shift, especially since they're skeletons. And so much comes from this moment in early development. We had an idea of like, okay, once they go with the crown, where are they going to end up, right? I always had this thought in my mind is like, well, we're going to do so many cool references in this film. This is going to be a really special like an ode to Steven Spielberg films, and they're like hidden. You know, there's hidden references throughout the film. This one in particular is pretty obvious. This is the scene in Jurassic Park where they're kind of hiding from the raptors in the kitchen. I wanted to do something similar, except they lost the crown and they're hiding from the chef. The problem with this scene is that it didn't quite make any sense. Why is there a chef in the kitchen at nighttime? This is supposed to be like midnight and like what kind of feels like a castle hotel. So there shouldn't be anyone there. But hey, what the hell? Maybe there is a couple of chefs there. Now we started changing it a lot because this, and even early on when I was writing the script, this felt cool. You know, they're running away from the chef. But then when we started concepting it and we did some early sort of explorations, it felt too scary. Like, I don't want to put these kids in this situation where they might get their arms chopped off or something like that. So then we kind of changed it up. It's like, well, what if we lighten it up a little bit? And these are like the late night chefs, you know, getting the pastries ready for some kind of party. But then it kind of lost that energy. Like this is the middle of the film. We have to have a height in stakes and danger, you know, and kind of build up to a climax. And this just felt like we're just continuously running. And in the script, it felt kind of fun, but visually it wasn't giving us that impact. So we went back to the drawing board and I started sketching some new ideas, and that's when we ended. And then obviously those ideas Toby took and kind of scaled them up and made them so much cooler. And we kind of came up with this idea of like, okay, we got to get to a point where, you know, the kitchen is just so crazy that it's something that they can't even fix. It's just out of control. And this is in the middle of the film. It's a perfect point for everything to be out of control. And even early on, we still had these characters. You know, it felt kind of cool to throw goblins or something in there. And it didn't. This eventually didn't work out. But this is an early period. We can do whatever we want as long as it's supporting the core story that these two brothers messed something up. They're trying to fix it, and while we're going on that journey, they're getting further and further and further from their goal, which is going to create so much more tension between the two of them because the older brother already hates the little brother. So we're just trying to put them in a shittier and shittier situation. And that's what this was doing. And I really liked this part because it felt like we had something really special. Like it really felt like a cool film. And we kept exploring it, you know, and different things like, okay, there's a moment where after they run away from the kitchen, they end up in this alley. And in the alley, we had these goblins that are like, ooh, a crown, because goblins like gold. So they're going to get into this fight with the goblins. But again, it's like, oh, goblins, knives, maybe it's a little too scary for little kids. So, okay, what if they accidentally think that they got away, but they run into these goblins who are just gambling with some of their gold and they see the crown. They're like, oh, that's better. And, you know, just slowly kind of like opening up what the story can be. So while we're developing these frames and getting really excited about this, the story is changing. And also at the same time that we're doing this, storyboards have begun. You know, we've already started storyboarding and all of these different elements are informing each other, but we still have no rules. We're still just trying to break the story and expand it as much as possible. There was even a scene at one point that was a really cool reference to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where Indy just has to get that holy grail, and he's almost willing to risk his father's life, everybody's lives. And I personally thought that was like a cool thing to kind of like bring into here. Like there's the moment where I would really love an Indiana Jones reference again, but it just didn't feel right for the character to suddenly have the big brother. The idea was cool. The big brother was so desperate for the crown that he was almost willing to risk his little brother's life. But it kind of took the attention away where suddenly the little brother was saving Peter, and it just kind of got a little messy where now like there's all these different messages in there. And even we try to lighten it up by adding these dragons instead of these kind of gargoyles, and it just didn't work. And again, this is a moment where even though these are beautiful concept frames, and thank God Toby works fast and he's so amazing, we threw them away. You know, this was just, it just didn't work. It didn't work for the story. And this is kind of something that I was trying to bring up in the beginning. So what's the story? Because this frame alone would be really cool and you can come up with a story behind it. But if it doesn't support like a whole meaning and an actual thing that you feel and support these particular characters, it doesn't work and it's gone. But yeah, there was so much exploration at the beginning. As you can see, we went through all kinds of stuff. We went through the world building. We went through potential ideas of what this crazy castle could be, referencing lighting. And because the whole point of the film is that it starts in the afternoon, goes into nighttime, and then goes back into the morning. Mostly because for two reasons. One, it supports the story. These are skeletons, so skeleton guards would naturally work the graveyard shift. But also it just makes it so that our whole story takes place at nighttime, where it can be more exciting. We can do a lot more stuff with lighting to kind of push the film emotionally. And then obviously the payoff is morning, which is really great. But we were just playing with that. Does mom take them to work? How does that work? How are the two little kids going to school? Do they take the bus on their own, or does mom take them to work? And just so many different things about the beginning of the process that eventually inform the whole film. One of them being this really important scene where if they're working by themselves, who is this king? Is he like a father figure, or is he somebody that they really look up to? And how are we presenting the king at nighttime? Obviously, we decided ultimately that he should be wearing pajamas, and they're just basically like, they have the shittiest job, the most important job, but the most boring job. They're just sitting there guarding, the crown all night long. But anyways, this early part of the process, I think it's very important to just have a core theme, a core story, but allow yourself to just break it wide open. I'm showing you all kinds of stuff that eventually didn't quite make it into the film, including this insane market that was more like a circus, and it just got too messy. We needed to tone it down. It's sad. A lot of these scenes were super cool. We even had this one moment where we were going to show this sort of like puppet shadow show that kind of became like it was foreshadowing what was going to happen later in the film. But, again, it just took too much time. It didn't really do anything for our characters, and it kind of took you away from that flow. And, when you're doing something that's 10 minutes, even though it's a lot of time, it's almost not that much time at all. And you can get lost in it really quickly if you put scenes like this in there. But some of the artwork really worked. I mean, this particular scene, which was done by a storyboard artist, Mike Deweese, while he was working on storyboards, he decided on his own that he wanted to do a frame for this particular moment and really render it out. I know that we wanted to do the scene where the final moment where they're hugging was this crazy, chaotic, like they just destroyed the world and the whole place was on fire. Eventually we toned it down, but he went off the rails and did this amazing concept frame. And this actually became something that pulled all the heart of the film to like one final conclusion, which was going to be this great hug amongst all this chaos. So all the things that this one character cares about is destroyed, but his focus has shifted because he realized that what he really cares about is his little brother, especially in this sort of dying situation. And this became such an important frame. But again, this wasn't like something that we specifically brought Mike to do. It wasn't like, hey, let's do these great moments. He just did this in the inspiration of the early process, and it made it into the film. And that's kind of what's really cool about this process is regardless of what sort of title or position that you're particularly working on the film, everything's important for the final story. We even did these other explorations that have nothing to do with the style of the film, or even where we ended up taking it color palette wise or compositionally. But these were also done by Mike, the storyboard artist. But he really loved doing these old school Disney type of pastels, and he did these just to kind of explore it, almost for fun in a way. But again, they gave me so much meaning, and I felt so much from these images that eventually we actually try to use these as an inspiration for the bigger moments in the film. So, as you can see in that early phase, anything goes. And it helps to inform the film, and it helps to kind of get us into this place. And what we ended up with in the end, and Misha, please stop me if we're running out of time. I want to get to this thing that's, I think, is very important. When you're doing a job professionally, and it's not an independent project, and even an independent project, there's always deadlines. There's always somebody that's funding the project, right? And you're not doing this for somebody. You're always trying to make sure that you're doing it for yourself first, but obviously this is eventually going to go into an audience. But in between that, there's going to be some form of a client, somebody that brought you on board to tell this story, and they're waiting to see it every step of the way. And this is a good, almost like a test, and it's something that you can almost make up on your own schedule if you're doing your own projects or your own concepts, to put yourself in a test early in the development, to stop and present it to somebody.